The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar, The Community Economic Effects of New Distribution Centers, How We Use REMI. I'm Brian Reel, Marketing and Event Coordinator at REMI, and I'll be hosting this webinar with Peter Evangelakis, Senior Vice President of Economics and Consulting at REMI. This webinar is being presented by Chief Economist at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Curtis Dubé. Throughout this webinar, you can ask a question at any time through the question box, and at the end of the presentation, Peter will moderate these questions with Curtis. Shortly after the presentation is concluded, an email will be sent to you that will contain a copy of the report and a video recording of this webinar for your reference. Peter, you can now go ahead and introduce Curtis.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's my pleasure to introduce Curtis Dubé for our webinar today. He's the Chief Economist at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. In that capacity, he tracks the condition of the economy, analyzes the impact of public policy and economic growth, and runs the Chamber's Chief Economists Committee. Previously, he was Senior Economist at the American Bankers Association and a Research Fellow in Tax and Economic Policy at the Heritage Foundation. He also worked at the accounting firm PricewaterhouseCoopers and at the Tax Foundation. Dubé has researched and published frequently on a wide range of tax and economic issues, and he's regularly quoted by the press and has often appeared in the media, including on CNBC, Fox Business, Fox News, and C-SPAN. He has testified before Congress several times and been cited in newspapers such as the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, and Politico. Dubé received his master's degree in economics from the University of Connecticut and his bachelor's degree in economics and leadership studies from the University of Richmond. He resides in Washington, D.C. With that, it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Curtis Dubé for a very interesting presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter, and it's good to be with you all this afternoon. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the origins of the project, how we use the REMI model, and how it worked perfectly for the project that we were tasked to do. So what happened was, this took a couple years of going back and forth, but one of our members really wanted us to do a study of the economic impact of distribution centers, new distribution centers that are built across the country. What we wanted to do was a unique project that would have been unique in that it wouldn't have been done before. We wanted to get data from them and do an econometric analysis on certain regions of a new distribution center. But for that, we needed a whole bunch of data for them. We needed them to tell us the cost of a new distribution center. And by the way, when I say distribution center, I'm talking about the type of thing where products go in, they get broken down and stored in a vast warehouse, and then repackaged and sent out to customers. I'm sure you know the type of facility I'm talking about. So they wanted to measure the economic impact of that, and we want to do it. That'd be a really cool, interesting project to do, and that if we could do it using their data, then we could have something that would get a lot of attention and be kind of not groundbreaking, but unique and different. No one else is going to have that data set. We went back and forth for a really long time. We laid out exactly the type of data that we would need to do this: square footage, the amount of investment, overall investment that goes in, so the square footage, how much building material, the workers needed to build one, how many jobs it would create inside the district center. We had a whole spreadsheet filled out with the type of data we were looking for. And we'd go back and forth, and they just couldn't get the data together, but they still wanted to do the analysis. And we looked at a lot of different ways. And in the back of my head, I knew that we were going to come back to REMI at some point. And then eventually that was clearly the path forward. So after, again, months of trying, we went forward with REMI. It was, like I said, it was clearly the best option. What you're trying to do is look at the introduction of a new distribution center, and the model that REMI has is really perfect for that type of analysis. In a lot of ways, I think it probably worked out better doing it this way than trying to nail a bunch of square pegs into round holes, which is what always happens when you're trying to take raw data and put it into a usable model. So it worked out really well. The user interface was really clear and easy to comprehend. And once you get used to the output, which isn't all that difficult, but once you get kind of the other kind of challenge that we had was that we didn't know exactly what the output we wanted it to be. Well, that wasn't all that clear. Again, we didn't get a whole lot of marching orders for the request for the project. But once we figured out exactly what we could get out of the model, which is an ample amount of data, it was really, really very useful and an enormous amount of information. In fact, we keep going back into it and pulling it back out to do follow-up reports. I'm doing one right now for the member, measuring the increase in tax revenue based on increased spending levels in each of the, I'll get into the MSAs that we picked, and property tax revenue. The data was all right there. All I had to go do was go pull the tax rates from all the different areas, and it was really simple to do. So the output is kind of the gift that keeps giving as we go forward. So we decided to do once we decided that REMI was the path that was going to get us to a finished product, was we sat down, we picked 30 MSAs, metropolitan statistical areas, all across the country. We wanted a distribution of them geographic, so we wanted them all around the country, but we wanted different sizes and in different regions. So we went round and round, but we finally settled on 30 that were spread out across the country and represented different sizes. So we had really big ones down to really pretty small MSAs. And I can probably share those. I don't think we listed them in the report. By the way, I believe I'm sharing the report. So here it is. It came out really, and we're going to share this around like Brian said, but came out really, really well. The output that was given by the REMI model really lent itself to this is what the member wanted. They wanted a glossy report, and we were able to do that based on the data that we were able to pull out. So we picked 30 MSAs that were representative of the U.S. economy, both geographic and size distribution. We picked a useful life of 20 years. That's roughly how long a distribution center lasts. Again, that's a little bit of guesswork in that because they haven't been around for 20 years. But that based back and forth with the member figured out that 20 years is roughly what these distribution centers will last for. We settled on 3,000 workers per a distribution center. Some are bigger, some are smaller, but it ended up being easier to pick an average, and that was roughly and that's kind of where they're trending. That roughly is that size. It's kind of the most efficient size that they use. So we went with 3,000 workers, and how we did the analysis is we did 30 separate ones. So we put a new distribution center in each of these 30 different MSAs, and so that we can look at the impact in a particular MSA, but then we also group them by size. So I think here I'll advance the report because it's in the chart. So we grouped them into 6 groups of 5 each. So of 5 groups, so it's 6 in each. So over 5 million, this is population. Population's over 5 million. Population between 2.5 million and 5 million. 1 million to 2.5 million. 250,000 to 1 million, and under 250,000. So again, we had a pretty good range of sizes, and we had a good. So we did go from small to large. The one thing that proved really vital and the most important thing about the REMI model for us was that distribution centers are not traditional warehouses. They involve a heck of a lot more, and the underlying economic data has not evolved and caught up to that quite yet. So we needed something in the model to represent a distribution center compared to a warehouse, and that the REMI model allowed us to do that, which made all the difference in the world. It really, I think, took the analysis to another level that really you couldn't get anywhere else. And so it made us happy because we had what we thought was a better result, and it made the member happy because it, to them, had a more accurate capturing of what the actual economic impact of a distribution center in a community actually is. So that was absolutely vital and really, really important, and really brought the value of the REMI model up a notch. So like I said, we grouped them into five different sizes, but we also pulled out a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of interesting data in the REMI model, but there's only so much that a reader can comprehend. So what we did is we just took kind of the highest level, but the most important level data and put it in there. We didn't even end up doing regional GDP because I'm not sure that the readers, the audience this was going for was really going to be able to internalize what GDP meant in a region. So we just stuck to the high level stuff that people know about best. So jobs, how many jobs were created? So if you create a 3,000 worker distribution center this is average over all 30 MSAs. We broke it out by size in a second. How many jobs do you create? Well, you create 2,111 extra jobs above the 3,000 jobs created directly in the distribution center. Grow the labor force. So if you're growing, and this ended up being a key insight as well. So if you're creating 211,000 jobs, if you're really creating 111 new jobs, all combined, and you have the labor force growing in a region by 3,557, which you can see on the chart, well, that means your unemployment rate's going down. And so we could point to that rather specifically because you're pulling people into the labor force, and then you're pulling people who were in the labor force and not working into jobs. And so that's going to drive the unemployment rate in a region down pretty substantially. So that was a key finding that, of course, the member was really happy to see. We did the increase in personal income and the increase in salary and wages. We probably could have just done wages and salaries, but I did think it was important to show that there are other secondary income effects. So wages and salaries are wages and salaries, and then income includes a bunch of other things as well. But I think that both of them are helpful in showing that the region as a whole is going to get richer because it's not just salary and wages that are rising, it's all these other impacts, and that comes from the income side of the calculation. But those wages and salaries are really mostly going to the new workers in the area. And we were able to show that, the percent increase in salary and wages, and this is all workers. We did break it out later just for workers in the warehousing sector, but we saw a big increase, almost 2% increase in wages for all workers in an MSA when a 3,000 worker distribution center was built. Same data, broke it out by size of MSA, so jobs, growth in labor force, personal income, salary, and wages. And then we did show the increase in the annual salaries of workers in the warehouse sector when a new distribution center is created. We did this, and this was really important to remember, and again, this was embedded in the REMI data. And kind of hinting at the beginning that the member didn't know exactly what they wanted to have in the report, and so we're kind of doing it as we went. They really, once we got going and started getting data outputs, they really wanted to see what happened to salary and wages in the whole sector because they get criticized a lot for driving wages down in that sector. So we went we called Peter, sent him a note and said, hey, they kind of want this set of data. Is it embedded in here? Can we find it? He pointed at us where it was, and it was really quick, and it was already in there after we had run the analysis. So we were able to pull that out, and they really were happy with that as well. Then we looked at the jobs. They also get criticized for for reducing the number of jobs in their industry, and we were able to show again embedded in the data that overall jobs increased more than the jobs created directly at the distribution center. So again, the industry is doing better as a whole in an MSA when a new distribution center is created. And so we were able to rebut specifically criticisms that they get a whole lot. So those two things are really important. We actually broke these out and said, here's how we respond based on our analysis to the specific criticisms of driving down wages and the number of workers. And then just overall, the third criticism they get is that these are not good for a regional economy, and we clearly we did bring a GDP in here, but we didn't put a number, but said regional economies get bigger, more jobs, higher wages for all workers. Clearly that's better for a regional economy, or it is good for a regional economy. It's not a bad thing when these things are happening. The last thing we did was we did case studies based on important cities for the member. So we were able to go through and use the MSA data and do a pull out and say, this is exactly how many jobs are created and income is growing in particular cities. So I don't think we ended up listing out the MSAs we used for the analysis, but we used some of them to pinpoint directly so that the member could point to them afterwards. And we did Atlanta, I can just list them, Atlanta, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Omaha, and Bangor, Maine. Again, a big stretch of sizes and regions. But that, again, that was another thing that made the member very happy. One thing I did, I kind of made it clear, but the number of ways you can slice and dice the data really becomes very important when you're doing this type of analysis. Because as you go, you realize that it would be interesting to present data in a new way, or your member decides they want a specific type of data that you didn't think of when you first went in to do the analysis. And that worked out wonderfully for us because, again, it was right there. And we just had, even if we didn't see it right away, Peter and the team at REMI would point it to us and say, no, it's in there, go look here and you'll see it. And it was always there. And that ended up being huge benefit for us. So I'll just wrap up by saying that we were extremely happy with the experience of REMI. We will undoubtedly use it again when an analysis like this comes up or a request like this comes up. We had significant challenges in getting the project started and knowing and figuring out how to do it based on the indecisiveness or the kind of uncertainness on the member side. REMI smoothed that all out and made once we got going, we knocked this out in a few weeks. It was really easy. It was really those other questions. So I had to over again. I would not change anything on the REMI side. I would change it all on the member side of having an actual set of outputs and an idea of the analysis that you want to be done at the beginning. It would be even smoother if we had done it from that end. But this was the first type of analysis we've done like this, and now we can point to this. So we're hoping that we can take this to our members and say, if you want to study your industry or your sector, here's what we did for distribution centers. We can do something like this for you. And that should help smooth the process going forward. But that was our experience with the REMI model. Couldn't have been happier, and happy to answer questions from you and Peter. And if I didn't get to anything about our experience with it that you're interested in, please ask away. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Curtis. We'll now look and see if there are any questions. It does look like there are some questions. Let's see. Okay, so we do have one question that's come in. So please, as Brian mentioned at the beginning, please feel free to share any questions in the questions pane in the GoToWebinar, and we'll be happy to answer them now. We have a good amount of time, so please feel free to go ahead. So it looks like some questions are coming in. Just one question that popped up here: is the report publicly available? And I think, as we mentioned earlier, it will be, and you'll be receiving an email with that information. So now let's get to some of the more substantive questions that are coming in. So the first one is, are these distribution centers state-led or by private companies? Was that factored in the analysis? And then are there any other economic indicators that were considered?
So is the question, who is building the distribution centers?
I think so. Yeah. So yeah. Is it I believe it's private, but I'll let you speak to that. And then with, how is that factored in the analysis, and were there any other economic indicators that maybe you looked at that maybe you didn't include in the report? You alluded to, for example, GDP, but I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, so these are private, so it would be the private, it would be private investment dollars. These are there's lots of different companies that build these. So these are the things, they're all over the country now, but like you'll see them off the side of the highway, these giant, let me see if I have a picture, I'm still sharing. That's a loading area. There's got to be a picture in here, but these are the things where it's these giant, they're almost like office parks of their own, giant warehouses, but they're jam-packed with all sorts of robotics and stuff and infrastructure to move boxes and packages around. So it's any business that does a whole lot of business on the internet. So businesses that are selling products, it can be one product, it can be lots of different products. These distribution centers are most beneficial for the type of retail where it's a lot of different types of products being broken down and sent out to consumers. So somebody who's buying personal care products like shampoo or soap, and kitchen equipment, and kids sports equipment, and things like that, and toothpaste. So how do you get all those different products into a warehouse? Then how do you get them from where you house them to packagers who can put them in a box and then get them to a ship? It's a really interesting logistical problem that a lot of companies are dealing with. The impetus for the report really came from the explosion, and we talked about this right at the beginning of the report, that there was an explosion of e-commerce at the beginning of the pandemic. And so there was this huge amount of investment that was needed to build out these distribution centers just to get us all our products, to get us all those different things that we get from all sorts of different companies throughout the internet. And so yeah, so it's private. It's all gonna be private. There's no public money in these type of investments. Where that would come in, and this is not something that our member asked us to look at. I can envision it being another one of the knock-on impacts. So the first one, government related, is the increase in tax revenues, which we're doing right now. But the other one would be, and I could see this request coming in, would be an analysis that looked at the economic impact of tax incentives, or just incentives in general, to build something like this in an area, because towns, cities, counties, states, they compete pretty heavily for investment like this, and then they'll play the states off based on the incentive package they can get. I could see them coming. I could see a member coming to us and saying, "Can we evaluate the economic impact of that, so we have something to weigh the costs and benefits?" The REMI model would be perfect for that. That's exactly who we would turn to do that type of analysis. And yeah, so I can see that coming up in the future. It hasn't come up yet, but it's something that was hot like 15 years or so ago, and it was hard to measure, but the REMI model will really lend itself to that. On the second question, the output, to me, it really was the GDP output that we wanted to look at, that as an economist made the most sense, but everything that goes into a GDP report, so if you're familiar with the monthly BEA report, that's what the output looks like. I could pull it up if we have a second, but all the different components of GDP are in the REMI model. So you can look at things like spending and investment. And I wanted to get the GDP in there and growth in output in an area. It didn't lend itself. The audience wasn't fellow economists. The audience is really more of a general audience, not economists, public policymakers at the state and local level. So jobs, income, that's what they care about. The GDP is a little bit too high level, but it turned out to be really, really important to have that, because when the secondary request came back to do the increase in the tax revenue, that's where I'm pulling it from. I'm pulling increases in PCE to approximate how much sales in an area go up, so I can measure sales tax revenue. And And then I'm using increases in investment, residential for residential property taxes, and non-residential structures and equipment so that we can do business property taxes. It was all in there. I didn't have to call Remy about that one. I didn't have to even ping Peter about it because it was already sitting there in the data. We just had to pull it for a few cities, and away we went. So that data was just sitting there, and it made a huge. It made my life very easy. The secondary project which I agreed to, which I thought might take me a long time, really took me an afternoon of work.
Excellent. Thank you. So we do have some more questions that have come in. One question is, are there any places where the impact was negative?
I would have to dig back through. There wasn't when it came to jobs and income, there wasn't anything negative. So you think about it, you're adding 3,000 new jobs into an area. You're almost, I don't want to say guaranteed, but that in itself is going to be positive. So you're putting positive in. There was one situation, again, we use those groupings, those 5 or 6 MSA sizes, those classifications. I think there was one MSA in one cohort that had like minimal or like slightly negative impact on wages, and in a particular sector, but it didn't come out, and we didn't explore. So when you group it in with its group in that cohort, it brings the average down, but the average is still positive. We just didn't have the time. It might be interesting to figure out why that particular MSA was negative. There's probably some unique characteristic of that area that would lead to that. It's probably a useful thing to look at going forward. But that was it. Most of the things are positive, again, because you're specifically adding to each one of these things. Remember, we did them 30 separately, so it wasn't 30 all at once. It was starting in Atlanta and then going to Omaha and then Bangor, not at all once. So we had 30 different sets of output that we then used to average here.
Excellent. So another question is, what types of jobs were created that were not the direct jobs, so outside of the new distribution center?
I can show you that. We have that. Oh, we did these cool graphics. We have a creative team here at the chamber, and they did. I really wanted to show how a distribution center works, and we were able to do this. Funny story is that on this page, I drew that just like a freehand here on the back of a piece of paper, and they were able to take it and make something that actually looks like a graphic. But that will come back and haunt me someday. My crude rudimentary stick figures and stuff. We did include in the appendix Remy's description of their PI plus model, which I think is helpful for those if somebody wanted to get in and technically kind of pull the report apart. All the information is right here. They can go in and see exactly how the analysis was done. Okay, so we did not do. Okay, so what you can do, you want to know the job creation. This is salary and wage growth in other industries within an MSA. We could do the same exact chart for jobs in an MSA. So we could go in and tell you how many jobs were created in utilities, construction, real estate, rental, all these down. So this would be like if you created a new distribution center in Atlanta, how many jobs would you create in information? That's all in the model. We didn't end up doing it. I can't remember why we didn't do it. There was a reason why, and I'm flipping back because I thought we ended up doing it. Maybe it just got too complicated, but we really want to stick to, because there are 2,111 jobs created, and that's where they would be. We have that data. We made a choice not to break it out by industry, and I can't remember exactly why that decision was made, but it's there, and we easily could have put it in.
Certainly, and I can maybe just speak very briefly, more generally about the types of impacts that we see, that are kind of induced by the direct, direct jobs. So, for example, you have, you know, jobs associated with the supply chain demands of a distribution center. You have jobs associated with the wages the wages and salaries that are being earned by the workers that are then being spent in the local economy. You have potentially all of that activity generating new need for investment, both direct and indirect investment in the region. And there are several other factors that the model accounts for. Those are often the three most important and kind of largest kind of largest in proportion of some of the secondary effects that we generally see. And so that that affects things like construction, retail trade, food services, professional services. There are a number of industries that are kind of well represented in these kind of different types of secondary impacts. But if there are any specific questions, again, we'll be distributing the report for everybody's perusal. And if there are specific questions that you have that you can't find the answers to in this webinar or in the report, please you'll be able to get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to get that addressed with Curtis. So let's move on to the next question. This is an interesting one. This attendee is asking if there is any consideration of some of the secondary impacts, and here it's not so much the economic impact that we were just talking about, but for example, such as increased truck traffic and tractor trailer overnight parking, and creating any maybe safety or enforcement issues, or maybe if that was addressed, even if it was kind of thought through qualitatively. I'd be curious to hear any thoughts on that issue. Curtis, I believe you may be muted. I cannot hear you.
Yeah, it was muted. It's an interesting question. It did not come up. It's not something that the member would want to necessarily highlight, so it wouldn't be something that we put in the model. But I think, Peter, you're probably better able to answer this question than I am. From what I remember of how the model is structured, I don't think that's an output we could have gotten with what we use the REMI model that we got. Or at least if we were going to look at it, it would have to have come from a secondary analysis. I don't think it would have been a kind of a natural output of what we did. But I'll leave that, Peter. You're probably better able to answer whether that's something that you can do using
Sure.
the PI Plus model, or if there's another REMI component that would be better suited for that.
Certainly, and I'll speak briefly. We do have the model that was used here was the PI Plus model. We do have some other specialty models that essentially build on the same model, some additional capabilities in different kind of policy areas. One of those is in transportation, our TrainSight model, where it could potentially be possible to look at the impact of any changes in traffic flows that may be generated by a particular a project or intervention. But yeah, I would say for at least based on my understanding of this project, it would be a little bit outside the scope. But yeah, potentially either kind of some kind of secondary analysis, or some kind of qualitative analysis that could be done. but aside from maybe looking at kind of traffic flow issues, some of these other issues like parking and things like that would be, I think, a little bit harder to do quantitatively in the REMI framework. Looks like we have a number of questions here, so thank you everybody for the engagement. So the next question is another interesting one. Were the distribution centers new builds, or were any of them retrofitting an old building?
That is a good question. They're new builds. I think where we are in this industry, the sector, that there's not retrofitting going on, that they're building them from scratch. But I do think as they advances as a key component of the logistics and supply chain, that will become an issue. And I think that I think the REMI model could handle that. We'd have to kind of really I call it like a facts and circumstances interview. That was really what slowed this project down, which is just getting information from the members about this. I'm not an expert on distribution centers. Well, I am now a minor expert, but before this, I didn't know anything about them. It took us a lot of kind of just digging for basic facts about what they are, because the more information you have, the better that you can do honing the REMI model to get a better output. And that's really where things got a lot better once we really drilled down and got information back from the member. But I think you would need to know a heck of a lot about what it entails going into a retrofit versus a new build. Because I would say that, at least the way and Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that we input the data, it's kind of the default that it's new. Of course, if you're retrofitting, it is kind of new. You're just not putting, so if, I don't know what, we ended up doing the input as employment, and that kind of equaled the input for a certain amount of investment. If you're doing a retrofit, you're doing it for a smaller amount of investment. And so that's probably, because why else would you do it? If you're going to do a retrofit, you're doing it because it's less expensive. So I think you could do it, but you'd probably do the input side differently than we did it, or you'd have to hone it differently. But again, it would be all that kind of upfront research with the builders of these things, getting really detailed information about how they actually go about doing the investment. All that upfront work is so worth it, because it makes the input to the model and then the output you get so much smoother, more effective, and better.
Yeah, very, very well said, Curtis. I think that's exactly right. Putting in those direct jobs does, have kind of, in the model, it has, kind of the natural investment responses. Those can, of course, be adjusted based on the project specific. And so if any of them were retrofits based on the data that you had, certainly that could have been done. But it does sound like in this case they were all new builds. Excellent.
And a retrofit, it's just from what I understand, and I'm not an expert on the building of these things, but the retrofit would be almost all basically new build, because they would start from, there's so much that goes into the building of these things, the internal process of it, that's going to be all new. You would just be using the shell of the buildings. How much are you saving? So say you have, I don't know how many square footage you are, but you know how big these places are. If you have an existing building, it would be almost like an airport hangar that you're retrofitting, but you're basically only keeping the walls and the roof.
Right. That's true. Excellent. So there's the next question, I think, can be at least potentially addressed in the report. But how much was the distribution center's influence on wages and salaries compared to the average growth of wages and salaries in general in a particular MSA? And maybe I'll just make an initial comment, and then I'll turn it over to you, Curtis. So when just a note in interpreting the numbers that come out of the REMI model. So when we see here, the percent increase of salaries and wages, or the percent increase in employment, or whatever the metric is that's being reported, that is generally, being compared against a business as usual scenario where that's not happening. So it's say 1.8% higher than it would have been without the distribution center in this case. That's a little bit different than saying it, for example, what it's not saying is that, it added 1.8 percentage points to the growth. That's, because growth over time, obviously depends on taking differences between successive years. And that's a calculation that can be done using the REMI outputs. But just to be careful about interpreting the results when you are looking at the report, that 1.8% increase is, unless I may be mistaken, and I'm not sure what the chamber did in their calculations, but if it's pulled right out of the model, that's the comparison. It's business as usual versus with the distribution center, as opposed to a change in the growth rate. But that change in the growth rate can be calculated based on the new forecast that would come that incorporates the distribution center.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know this might be backwards depending on how the camera is doing it, but we do this a lot. This is the solid line is the REMI forecast, and you can pull that out. We did that actually a couple of times. Like, we just couldn't wrap our head around a particular output. Way to articulate it. There's a lot of trying to, in the text of the report, trying to say things in plain language. And sometimes we had to do this. We had to pull the baseline forecast for an MSA out, and then look. The dotted line would be the output of the introduction of the distribution center, and look at the delta. Which those deltas are in there as well. But sometimes it was in the output of the model. Sometimes it was just helpful to have the base forecast and then compare it to the number, so that we could wrap our heads around the output better. But we always had to keep coming back to this, showing the number. Like, no, it's the growth above trend. It basically is what we're getting at, and that means that wages and salaries are 1.8% above what they would have been had the distribution center never been put into place. The other thing I should have pointed out is that I forget how far out you can do the years, but there were a heck of a lot more than 20 years. We could have done a lot longer life. We could have done a shorter life, depending on the type of analysis we wanted to do. We thought 20 was the right number of years for a lot of reasons, but you can run the analysis out a lot longer. I think, Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the longer that you run so for an analysis like this, you create the distribution center in year one. So for us, it was 2022, and we did it to 2041. So that's 20 distinct years.
Right.
The longer you run that out, the more that the dotted line is going to run back to the baseline, because the impact can only extend for so long. But different analyses are going to be different. So you could be a situation where you're adding new workers every year, you're doing something different. This is just a one-time investment in one distribution center. So eventually they'll converge. That would have been an interesting question as to like how far out. They were not converging. They were converging in the output, but it was still substantial, a substantial extra, a delta, even 20 years out.
Right, and there, I would say, if you first of all, I'll say just in the model is able to do analysis out to the year 2080, so there is quite a runway in there to do longer. I will say if you put in, inputs for, particular facility, as long as that facility remains operational out into the future, it is a dynamic model. So some of the initial bump in economic indicators will, tend to decline a little bit over time, just because when you have economic stimulus, you have, for example, costs go up a little bit, prices go up a little bit, the economy is running a little bit hotter, and so that that will put some downward pressure on the overall impact. But I would say, generally speaking, you generally kind of maybe settle into something like a long-term equilibrium where, still each year it is a dynamic model, so it's never going to settle into something totally flat. But you do tend to see, over time, kind of a big bump, and then it kind of settles down a little bit into kind of a longer-term trend that is above the business as usual trend. But again, that'll depend a little bit, but that's generally what we see in the model. And actually, the discussion of the lifetime leads us into our next question, which is, and Curtis, as you said, you're not necessarily an expert on all of the technical details here, but maybe if you have a sense from the member or some of the research that you or your staff did about, what was the reason for the 20 years? Was it, more kind of a physical issue of the facility, or, anticipated kind of market demand related factors? Kind of what was maybe the big picture behind the 20 years?
Yeah, good question. There's not a whole lot of science behind it. It's mostly that these things are anticipated to last more than 10 years. 30 years seem way too long, and that's roughly about, well, just back and forth again, that kind of facts and circumstances talking we did with the member. That's where we kind of arrived. They could be shorter, they could be longer. 20 years just seemed about right. It was much more art than science, and just kind of more of a gut feeling. That could prove to be wrong. But to me, when you do these type of things, what I tell folks we're doing them for is that as long as you lay it out and explain how you got there, that's fine. That you didn't, and you don't over-represent or over-explain, like that this is, I shouldn't say you're over certain that this is exactly how long, then people can factor that into their analysis of your analysis.
Certainly. Thank you. So we still have a number of questions. We do have about 11 minutes left in our scheduled time. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can, and then if there's any, we're happy to follow up after the webinar as needed as well. Let's see. The next question is in regards to the owners of the distribution centers. Let's see. Did the economic impacts of the new center change depending on market cap or company size of the firm that's building or owning and operating the center?
If it's okay, Peter, then I'll start giving short answers so we can get through more of them. No, we did not factor that into the owners. The characteristics of the owner are not captured in the model. The extent that would probably come into effect is where and how they do the building of the center. So if you have this is kind of just my own guess, a smaller business doing the building of it, they're more likely to use more local contractors and suppliers. Bigger ones are likely to have crews that move around the country and build these things all over the place. That could factor into it, but other than that, I don't see how it would impact this type of analysis.
Thank you. We have a question here that I'll probably just address because it's a more modeling question. So the question is, what are some of the factors used to develop multipliers for the additional economic impact? And I'll say, so the numbers, the numbers coming out of the analysis were, from the REMI model. REMI has a kind of a modeling approach that takes into account, input-output analysis, which is, kind of where this language of the, direct and then, secondary, direct, indirect, and induced impacts come from. We have also, kind of behavioral kind of impacts that we look at. So, For example, consumers responding to prices, businesses responding to costs, things of that nature, as well as a lot of trade and other geographical relationships, that demographic relationships, and all of those are kind of estimated, statistically, kind of those relationships. And so we don't actually have explicit multipliers that are in the model. What arises out of the analysis is the interplay of our modeling of the whole economy based on some of those different modeling techniques. And so then you can kind of back out, based on this, in this particular industry, in this particular region, in this particular year, we put in, a certain number of direct jobs, and we saw this total impact. And so we can kind of back out what the multipliers ended up being. But it's a little bit different of a framework. It's not a multipliers framework per se. It's a more holistic modeling of the economy with REMI. So let's see. So the next question here, the question asks about making a distinction between different warehouse types. It sounds like, my understanding is that it was really about the distribution centers, but here they're asking about distribution centers, fulfillment centers, first mile, last mile. So I believe it was mainly or entirely about the distribution center, but please correct me if I'm wrong, Curtis.
We did a uniform type of distribution center. So it's the same distribution center in all of the 30 MSAs. So you can think about it as building this thing, plopping it down in Atlanta, and picking it up and putting it down in Bangor, Riverside, California, I think was another one. There was a bunch of them, but it's the same distribution center in all these areas. And working with the member, they were fairly clear that that's kind of how it is. These things are kind of uniform. They're similar in the areas that they serve, and that was a perfectly fine way to do it.
Great, thank you. The next question, I'll also maybe make a brief comment and then turn it over to you, Curtis. So the question is, were the jobs calculated as net jobs or gross jobs? And then there's a question kind of built in there about, jobs potentially being lost in other retail facilities, as people turn from, just traditional or brick and mortar to more, shopping online. I will say, just in terms of just the technical part of the model, we are the impacts that are being captured are, on net. This is the increase in on net of the jobs. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Curtis. I don't believe that some of these other kind of trends around distribution centers, like shifts in shopping behavior, I don't believe that those were a part of the scope of this study, but I'll let you speak to that more.
It is an interesting question. So going back and forth with the member, that's right. The changing trend in how we all shop is not included in the analysis, although it kind of is. The whole point of adding more of these is because the trend in shopping has changed. It's kind of the whole purpose of the report, and why you create a new 3,000 worker distribution center 30 different times across the country. So it is kind of in there by default. But what they really want to compare the distribution centers to retail. So that tells me that they see them as part of the retail supply chain and logistics, and we just couldn't really figure out how that would be the case. So that might be something to explore going forward, the connection between distribution centers and the retail sector. I haven't put any more thought into it about how you would do that, but I do think that the REMI model does have the capabilities to try to walk things through, but it would require again, back to the work with the member to provide the data, and they're thinking about how they conceive of these being more retail than logistical warehouse and supply chain centers of commerce.
Yeah, I think that kind of analysis certainly could be done in the REMI model. I think probably some additional preliminary research would need to be done so we can have a sense of what the relationship is there. So I think it's a very interesting and important dynamic, but it's a little bit more multifaceted. Excellent. So there's a question here just about the modeling, and again, the REMI model is used, and the report will have documentation of the REMI model, so that will be available for viewing. Let's see, there's a question here about high turnover rates at warehouses, and they quote a statistic from the BLS putting turnover rates at 43%. I don't know to what extent that was discussed or thought about it in the analysis, but I'll let you speak to that, Curtis.
Yeah, we did not include that in the analysis because think about it this way, or I'll say we thought about it this way, that the 3,000 jobs that this distribution center is created for 3,000 workers. The mix of those workers is also, and this we did include this. This is part of how we tuned it for a distribution center compared to a warehouse. It's set for, say, I forget the exact number, but it's actually in the report, so you can read it. We said that there are going to, I say it was 2,950 warehouse workers. So forklift operators, packers, unpackers, those type of jobs that every warehouse needs. But then I think maybe say 50 jobs were mechanical engineers, software engineers, robotics experts, the people that are taking care of the equipment that's unique to a distribution center. But the creation of one of these things, it was static after it's created, is I guess the way to say it, that it's always going to require that many people to function. And these are FTEs. We're not saying that these are there 24 hours a day or in different shifts of 8 hours. It's one distribution center requires 3,000 FTEs, full-time equivalent employees, to operate at 100% capacity. And that's how we did it. So you certainly could have turnover that would have different types of economic impacts, but we did not capture that in this analysis.
Thank you. There's a question here just about the median income and for the distribution centers studied. So just in the interest of time, I think I'm not sure if that's in the report. Obviously, there were about 30 MSAs in the study, and there's likely a range there of the characteristics.
We did not put it in the report. It's in the output.
Certainly. So yeah, if that remains a question from from this attendee, Steve, please feel free to reach out. Be happy to get more information as available. So we are just about at time. We do have a few questions left in the queue, but I want to make sure that we're respectful of everybody's time. So what I think we can do is, if there are remaining questions that people would like to still get addressed, we're happy to follow up. You can certainly reach out to us at REMI, and we can make connections as appropriate. I guess with that, maybe I'll turn it back over to Brian, and just a final note, we will be sharing an email with everyone that has information about the report and this recording. So you will be able to review all of this more carefully on your own. So I'll just say my thank yous to Curtis for joining us today for a great presentation, and to everybody for attending. We hope to see you at our future webinars. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Curtis, for the great engaging presentation. Thank you to all who attended and to Peter as well. And yeah, like Peter said, we'll be sending out in about an hour a copy of the recording of this webinar as well as the reports. If you have any questions about this presentation or REMI, you can reach out to info@remi.com. And again, we'll direct you as needed. Like we said, we did miss a few questions just for the sake of time. We do have those questions recorded, so I'll be able to share them and hopefully we can answer them as we can. And thank you everybody for attending and have a great day.